just to open this space up, Jean-Martin, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's such a pleasure to host you here on the Farmers Footprint community. And I just have to say that internally, we've been talking a lot about collaboration and what it means within the farming and regenerative agriculture space to be uplifting really beautiful voices, but also simultaneously removing our individual lenses from their story. So grateful for you to be here with us today to share the amazing work that you're doing in the world to empower other fellow farmers. And then to everyone else who's joined and is hanging out here in the audience and excited for this talk with the amazing JM, as his friends call him. Thank you guys for being here. I think there's a huge moment and piece and just really like message to be had around people from Sweden and Australia and from Europe and all across the US joining together around this beautiful learning moment and conversation and ability to ask a farmer questions, even though some of us might not be farmers. So just acknowledging that we all have a really important voice and role within this movement as well. So thank you guys for being here. Very excited to kick this off.
Super well said.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So to kick it off, Jam, I'm just going to quote you, not like you're not going to talk enough during this whole thing, but I love this quote from you. And it says, "My mission is to inspire, educate, and empower people to work together towards multiplying the number of small ecological farms all over the world. This, I believe, is how we can replace the poison and destruction of industrial agriculture with a food system based in nature and community. Food grown with care by and for people who care." So especially the by and for people who care piece, I think is something that you speak so eloquently to. And it's so simple, this access point of it's a universal thing to taste and eat and experience food. It's our life force, it's our vibrancy, it's our connection to earth in so many ways. And to expand that out beyond just walking down a grocery store aisle, but to go to a farmer's market or your garden and meet you and see the love and care with which you grow your food and to just share that exchange with people. I think that is the connection that you speak to in your work so well. So, I mean, you guys probably know him very well, but if this is your first time being introduced to Jean-Martin Fortier's work, or JM as his friends call him, he is a farmer, he is an educator, and a best-selling author specializing in organic and biointensive vegetable production. And he's based out of Quebec, Canada, where he manages, Jam, you might have to help me with this one, but Ferme de Quatre-Temps.
That's great. Well said.
But I love that in essentially the French translation of that is the 4-season farm. So you guys are growing up here year round and have found methods and technical ways to create that. And you're doing it on this research and training farm that is intending to serve as a model for the future of agriculture. So incorporating permaculture principles in your farm design around vegetable, orchard production, and as well as your pastured lands. So he's not just farming all the time, though. You have your award-winning book, which has now been published in over 10 languages, The Market Gardener. And that's really inspired hundreds of thousands of readers worldwide to reimagine the ecological human-scale food systems. You also have your Market Gardeners Masterclass, which is a comprehensive online program and which has supported over 2,000 growers in over 60 countries. I'm super stoked to hear some of those diverse stories and maybe some of the growers that you've really been excited by and watched their work explode.
Yeah, lots to share about that.
Amazing. So I think we touched on it in the quote, but I know your message is one of empowerment, and really it feels like your work has this tone about it to educate and encourage and inspire people to pursue a career and lifestyle that's focused on growing food with care. So really that love piece to it. And then last but not least, I believe this last year, actually in 2020, an amazing feat, you've co-founded or founded Growers & Co., which is an apparel and farm tool company that also has a biannual magazine that's focusing on celebrating the movement of small-scale organic farming. And you guys are doing a beautiful job storytelling in that. So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for creating that and putting it out into the world. And then beyond that, you're a husband, a dedicated father of 2, a traveler, a surfer, and a lover of great wine and food. No surprise there. So super excited to pass you the mic and have you share your, go into a deep dive of human scale and biointensive agriculture and the techniques you use. And really just the foundational methods of human scale agriculture. So with that, I'd love to pass it your way.
Well, okay, thank you. Well, when you hear all your kind of bio being read like that, you're like, okay, this is a lot of things. but I think this has been the last 15 years. And so, it's fast said, all these things connecting one to the other, but a lot of these projects have been a long time in the making. And I started farming because I didn't know anything about farming, and I was in Santa Fe, and I was at the farmers market, and I was looking for adventure. I was looking to make a contribution, and the farm manager said, "Oh, you should go to work at Richard's farm." And he was from French Canada. He was Quebecois. And that was my introduction to farming, to small scale farming. And Richard would go and spend his winter down south in Mexico. And he would just kind of hang out for 2 months down there. And then he would be the salad king of Santa Fe. Everybody would line up, and, the people wanted to buy Richard's salad. He was like the king. And there's a motley crew of growers, really cool people. And it was so positive. And, that's kind of the vibe that I got. That was my introduction to farming. It was positive. You were cool. You were making money. Richard was making good money. You were traveling in the winter, and it was just kind of like, this is a great lifestyle. And, that's how I started. And obviously, if people have been following me, I always share some of the success. And, I teach people now how to farm successfully, and it's really principle based, but there was ups and downs along my journey, but it's always been exciting, and it's always been fun. And I enjoy my days. Today we were in the greenhouse pumping tunes and just, putting transplants into plugs. And it's just like, it's a great way to spend the day. And that's mostly how I feel about my job.
So beautiful. I know. I love that you're coming live from the greenhouse. It's super, just feels really earthy and in touch with it. So
yeah, you want to see it? Check
yeah,
it out.
please. I love. Oh my gosh.
So, just so you know, it was 0 Fahrenheit the last 3 weeks, and still here, we're not heating. And we have a lot of great spinach, a lot of great stuff, kale. And it's amazing how when you have only a shelter, like the greenhouse, that's just enough to protect the crops. And then when the sun comes out, it gets really light. It's really warm now. And we grow year round.
Yeah, I love that. So I'd love to dive a little deeply for those who maybe this is their first time becoming familiar with just your method of change. Can you tell us a little bit about, to me, you represent this movement of empowering farmers to create a lifestyle and, farming production that's really small scale, like typically under 3 acres, and create a profitable vegetable production, the ability to change their life with that. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about, what does that mean to you? Like, what is human scale agriculture? And what are some of the foundational methods that you teach about?
Right. Really good question. So I would say that my claim to fame, if you can say something like that, is when I wrote my book, The Market Gardener, it was laying out a structure of how to set up a farm, how to size it appropriately, which kind of tools to use for that size of micro farming, how to use those tools, really kind of specifics about how to do things. But the size was really, there was a constraint. We farm 1.5 acres, and the tools and the design and the patterns and the crop planning and all of the things that we do are organized for it to be optimal in that size of farming. Okay. So that was the Market Gardener coming out. And for a lot of people back then, that was in 2012. So it's been almost 10 years now. A lot of people knew that small scale, like 2-acre farms could be profitable. Some people were doing it, but nobody had kind of put all the pieces together to really explain, okay, so this is how, you standardize your blocks. Your beds should be, permanent, and they should all be the same size because the material gets versatile. These are the tools that you use on a 30-inch beds. This is the spacing for each of the crops. This is the density for each of the seeders, for each of the seeds. So all of the details were never there. It was always kind of this general idea, farming is possible. You can make it, perhaps it's tough. You would hear much more that it's tough and difficult. And obviously, if you go to your ag extension agent, they don't know. They can't tell you how to farm. They don't know. So people would learn always from being on other people's farm. And most of the growers back then, now it has changed a little bit, but they were farming small acreage with machinery made for big acreage. So they would have tractors, old tractors, all of this equipment that's made for another model of farming. And they were trying to figure that, how to make it work. And they were doing it because there's demand for the produce. So, you know, you can grow veggies and you can sell them. But what if you're doing them? What if you're growing really efficiently? What if you're saving a lot of time in your day? What if you're saving a lot of costs? What if you're designing the thing to be efficient, like the whole way through 360? And that's what we had been doing on our farm. And, you know, I traveled all around in Europe, and I went to Cuba, and I've been traveling so much that I visit farms. And when I would visit farms, I would look at the design and how they set up things and why this is like that. I read a lot, read in French, read in English, go to France. And all of this kind of connected to our style of farming and to the book. And I think the book has helped a lot of people just understand how to set up a farm and how to make it work, because there's a guideline now. And so for me, you know, being passionate about farming and about what we do and why it's important has always been there. And I don't think it's going to go away. If you hear by my tone, I'm really excited about speaking about these things. But I've always made it a point to always also be, you know, teaching or at least passing along techniques that work, strategies that are tested, trialed, and true. You know, and that for me is just as important as being really excited and you know, vocal about my enthusiasm for this. So that has been my two things. You know, I want to be, you know, expressing the fact that we need this to happen and we want more of it. But I also want to make sure that I'm not just a cheerleader. I'm also there to support and help and teach people that want to get into farming, and sometimes bigger farmers, you know, big farms that want to scale down because they'll make more money, you know, and that's just, that's what I do.
I love that. And I think you're so right. That thought partnership piece is so important to empower people. I guess to me, your work also speaks to that. Like, it doesn't allow the ideological to escape the practical. I think there's so many people who are coming, maybe have a garden in the backyard or an aspiring farmer, and come across your work, and there's that flip of a switch, like, oh, I could figure out how to get 3 acres or lease, or kind of move into that next step. So I'm curious if people are listening today and are excited about making a change in that sense, like, how would you guide them? Like, what would be a great first step for someone who's curious about starting their
For sure. The you know, read The Market Gardener. That's the first thing. And because the book, the way it's laid out, it's organized, it's somewhat of our story, but in the background, it explains to you what it is and why it works. And it's a really, you know, I wrote the book and I'm really proud about it, but it feels like the book has a life of its own now. Like you said, it's in 10 languages, and people around the world are using it as a guideline to start their farms. You know, they're in Chile, they're doing that. They're in, you know, Brazil, they're in Mexico, they're in Germany, they're in Netherlands, they're in Australia. It's these principles are kind of universal, because we're not telling people how to think about things. We're telling them how to do things. And yeah, so that's the first. It's a primer. It was made for people that are starting, so it's written in that tone. And the other advice I always give people who want to start in this adventure is to work at least one full season on somebody else's farm. That's how you understand what it means to be outside every day, to be committed to good, bad weather, to, you know, there's a lot of stress with farming, because these are long days, and you really need to be, you know, you can't just chat all day. You need to be doing stuff. You need to be producing. And so just to live that for a full year. And after that, you'll know if you like it, if you want to pursue it, or if it was only, you know, a dream that you had and you did it and you're happy, but now you're ready to, you know, do something else. And so these are the two advice I always give: read The Market Gardener and work one full year on a farm. And then the third piece of advice is, if you think that you want to be a farmer, then don't wait too long before you start, because you learn farming by doing it. Like you can be working on somebody else's farm and learning the craft and learning how to maneuver and move, but all of the intel, how to manage different things, how to think about this and that, and how to sell, and how to, you know, do the crop planning, and how to do the accounting, and how to do the crop rotation, all of these things, you kind of need to do them to learn. And so after 1 or 2 seasons, boom, you know, start a micro farm. You need half an acre and you know, $20,000 of tools, and you can be having a 50 people CSA. That's how you start, you know? So
it's amazing. I feel like that just paints a picture in your head of how fingertips it could be. So beautiful.
Yeah, it is. You know, farming is you know, it's obviously the smarter you are, and the more, you know, if you work really hard, you'll get better at it. But it's not rocket science, you know. We're growing food, we're growing veggies. It's the garden.
Exactly. I mean, that connection is so important. So I kind of feel like your theory of change is this small scale ecological method of market gardening, clearly based on your work. I'm really curious to just pick your brain a little bit on how that competes or can stack up against like monoculture agriculture. So kind of, you mentioned big farmers, maybe potentially scaling down. I think there's a lot of different ways that people can transition into or transition like sideways into the scale of farming and gardening that you are doing. But also on a larger zoomed out 30,000 foot view, how do you view the future of food production and, you know, our global food system being activated by small scale ecological human scale biointensive farming?
Okay, amazing. I like the depth of this discussion. This is great. So for me, how I see things is that what we do here and what is done elsewhere works because people are willing to buy local, buy direct from farmers. Okay, so that's really important, because if we need to do volumes to get into Whole Foods or whoever, then our model doesn't work at all. Okay, our model is based on, instead of doing 10,000 lettuces and making 25 cents out of them, I will do 1,000 and make $3. And that's how we can be relevant in terms of economics, because we don't need to do the volumes because we're getting the full return on what we're producing. So the scale of our farms, smaller is more profitable, smaller is better in a way, works because there's direct farmer to consumer mechanisms that allow this exchange to happen. So that's the principle number one. So for me, it's about expanding these mechanisms. So, you know, more farmers market, better CSA, stores that are co-ops of farmers, or each farmer's having their own store, their e-store, whatever. Like, I don't know what all these answers are. And sometimes, you know, it's not up to people like me to come up with these strategies, but there's a lot of people working on them. And so how can we pull people out of Walmart and bring them in to a relationship with farmers? And if we do that, and if we do that, and if we do that, because once people have tasted real food, once people have connected with me or with, you know, Greg, the grower there, or Julia, or whatever, Tina, you know, they're like, there's a connection, there's a relationship that's being created that has value more than just what you're buying. It's not just a commodity. You're buying an idea, you're meeting people, there's a relationship there. And I think that's what needs to multiply. And when people touch that, they don't go back necessarily to Walmart, where everything is kind of impersonal and, you know, the lowest price is what you're going there for. You know, people that come to me, they're not coming for the price. They're coming because the quality, because they believe in what I do. They like me. They like my crew. And so it's about disrupting the food system in that way. And I think this is happening. It's been happening for 30 years. And I think the new generation of people are coming with smarter ideas how to disrupt the system. And we're proving that the farm doesn't need to go with volumes to make a living. So these two things come hand in hand. And so that's the first part of the equation. So small scale farming is possible if it's more people, buying directly from small farms. So we need to improve that. And my view is that if you're doing 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 acres, you're not competing with your neighbor, because you're feeding, 500, 600, 1,000 people. And so that's why we multiply the number of farms. So instead of looking at farms as being like a monolithic kind of big block of production, you're like, okay, well, in that 30 mile radius, there's not 5 farms, there's 500 farms. And what does that feel and look like differently? People are, there's more people in the schools, it's a community now. So for me, this is vibrancy, and this is what we need. And this is how things were before. So it's kind of like returning to more of an agrarian setup. And I think that's cool. I think that there's a lot of positive in that.
Absolutely. And I think what you're speaking to also is this larger sense of regeneration. And it's not just soil health, and it's not just no-till or cover cropping. It's almost like an essence and a feeling of like a way of life, I think, that's part of what I'm realizing. It's so relational. You can't extract and separate one piece or component of a person or a vegetable or, a cubic square foot of soil from that experience. And then that translates out to how we live and, the way we set up, the ways that we interact and exchange and all these things. So
and the food that we eat is very personal. It's an intimate act. When we're eating, it's somewhat sacred. That's what we're fueling our body with. So the intention behind how that food was produced creates an energy, and that energy goes into you. And that's not faith. That's kind of universal. These are kind of facts. So why I say food grown with care by people and for people who care is because that's the difference. Like, I grow food here because I care. I care about the people that I'm feeding, and the people that eat my food, they care about me. So there's a real positive relationship there. And if there's one thing that the pandemic is teaching us, is that relationships for humans, it's like really important. That's kind of what we're all about. So, I think there's a lot of profoundness there, and that's why I'm optimistic. I'm like, people are like, yeah, small farms will never feed the world. Well, 100 years ago, that's how the world was fed. So, 100 years is nothing,
Absolutely. Yeah, we can switch it all back. I mean, I think there's always kind of that pendulum swing happening.
Yeah, especially if you put in the balance, like the convenience of big agriculture. What is it? Like, I see a lot of petroleum being used for everything, for the tractors, for the seeds that are modified, for the herbicides, the pesticides, the fungicides, the tilling that, plows the earth and, depletes all the carbon. It's just like all of this for cheap food that makes us sick. Like, what's the win-win here? I don't see it,
Mm-hmm. And I think too, it's so true. There's so many compounding factors in that. Someone just put in the chat a statistic that I've known about as well, but 70% of the world is fed by quote unquote peasant farmers. So really small scale farming is still active and alive and producing 70% of the food that humans are eating in the entire world is by small scale farmers in many areas throughout the world. So I think there are also models of this being enacted in India and the Philippines and Africa, and so many areas also in, the global north as well. But just to see that really coming alive in different areas, like flowed through kind of a more technical expertise on your side, and then also organically just coming up through possibility of just what's real for them in that place.
Plus, we need to ask ourselves, we're not invited to the G8 summit, and you and I are not calling all these shots, but, with all that's happening now, automation and AI and people, will not be driving taxis anymore, not be driving trucks anymore. It's just like, there's a lot of people in North America. What will they be doing? It's just, that's a legitimate question. It's like, what are going to people be up to if there's no more work? Because everything is shipped through, Amazon, and then you don't have a job because everything's automated. So, growing food, being outside, recreating relationships. I don't know. I just feel that it's not so utopian. It's kind of pragmatic in a way.
It's very, very, I love that. To circle back, because I know we probably have quite a few farmers on the call, I'd love to dive into some of the technicalities around your regenerative practices. So I've heard you speak about the concept of living soil. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and or your thoughts around farmers marketing nutritional value or nutritional density of their fresh local vegetables or whatever they are growing as a unique selling point, as that is kind of connected to soil health and regenerative practices.
Do you want to start with the first thing?
Yeah, sure. Soil health. Let's go.
Okay. So for me, soil health, I call it living soils because there's a big movement now for regenerative, yes, but there's also another move. Sometimes it comes hand in hand with no-till, and a lot of farms are even branding themselves as no-till farms, and they're tapping into the fact that when you till, you're depleting the carbon out of the soil, and you're kind of exhausting your soil long term. And in a carbon economy where we're trying to extract carbon back into the soils, plowing and tilling is the last thing we want to do. We want to reverse that trend. So all of this being said, like for me, I got interested into farming because I was studying ecology, environmental science. That's how I was trained. I did 3 years of study of that. And when I was at uni, we were studying environmental services and how to monetize them so that instead of just kind of bulldozing the water stream, we would enhance it so that it would filter the water better, and then we wouldn't have to build a factory. So I was kind of trained in that way. And for me, I've always looked at the soil as not just something to put fuel into to get the veggies, like not to fertilize, but something that's alive, that has a soil web, that has, bacteria, that has fungi. And I studied soil ecology, and I kind of know how it operates. And when you study soil ecology, you understand that, man, this soil is alive. It's a breathing organism that is so important in all the different things that they do. And when you plow or when you rototill or when you come and just kind of overhaul everything, you destroy the habitat of the life in the soil. And you can't count on the life to do the work that it should be doing, which is mineralize organic matter into the nutrients for your plants. And so we've been really working on strategies to minimally work the soil or not at all in the context of a microfarm. And we've come up with, numerous strategies to do that. And we apply them in different circumstances at different timing with different crops. It's like a toolbox. And, we're able to grow really great crops with soils that are better now than when we started. And that's kind of the theory.
And I'm curious, I've seen a little bit about how you guys tarp, and then also I think you guys compost teas. So maybe I'd love to hear a little sneak peek on the Market Gardener book, but love to hear some of those methods.
Well, I would say tarping was big for us. I think I was kind of one of the first one to use big tarps like that. Now they're really common in North America, especially. But we used tarps at first because we thought that it would warm up the soil in the spring. Since here it's really cold, we're like, well, let's just put big tarps over our field blocks, and then we would be earlier to put our crops into the soil. And what I realized is that when we would put these tarps over the soil, whatever was growing underneath, weeds or old crops or whatever, after a couple of weeks, the absence of light just kind of destroys what's growing underneath. And you're left with bare soil, which is important when you're starting crops. So whenever you're starting any seedlings, transplanting or direct seeding, oops, somebody's calling me at the same time. whenever you're starting seedlings, you know, the clean slate, like a clean bed to start with, is kind of how you want to start for many, many different reasons, because, you know, seeders will operate better. It's going to be more efficient for your transplant. You won't be dealing with weeds until later on. But to get to that clean slate, like bare soil, nicely prepped soil, without using tools like tillers, plows, discs, and that was the conundrum, and that's how the tarps made that possible. And then we use also permanent bed systems, so we're not shaping beds, we're not plowing and reshaping soil all the time. The beds are permanent, and then we tarp them, and then when we remove the tarps, you know, they're clean. And then we broad fork, which is a tool that opens up the soil but doesn't invert the layers, doesn't harm the earthworm population. And then we put our compost or amendments, and then we shallowly cultivate just to create a clean seed bed. And then we plant into that. And so that's our minimal tillage practice. Is that kind of a no-till plus. And then we have, you know, cover crops, crop rotation. You talked about compost teas and, you know, different solutions of microorganisms that we can spray, especially in our nursery. Like all the crops are sprayed weekly so that they're well inoculated with all these bacterias. And the theory behind that is if your crop or you know, if humans, whatever, is pollinated with all these good bacterias, there's less room for pathogens to come in and occupy the space. And that's what we do for the plants. And that's also how we design the farm. The farm has flowering hedgerows everywhere. It has bird houses everywhere. And we've designed it so that there's so much life, there's so many insects surrounding the market garden, that whenever a pest wants to come in and just kind of predate, it doesn't have the room to explode because it's competing with all these other insects and with these birds that are eating it. And so all of this this is what we're doing.
No, I love it. And I think what you're speaking to is something that's been fascinating and coming up in conversation in the Farmers Footprint community recently, is this idea around a farm being just a piece of an ecosystem. Like oftentimes I think we think about like a lot of land and it's like, that's the center of like this food growth, but the interaction with pollinators and predators from outside, like you are feeding them in some ways, you're providing habitat for them in other ways. So there's pieces, I just love how you spoke about that. Like it definitely is just a constellation within this larger context of.
Yeah. And that's another reason why, you know, big industrial farms that feed a lot of people, they don't have room for that. They're just kind of monolithic, you know, 1,000 acre of flat land that's tilled, and there's no room for insects. There's no roots for butterflies. There's no room for birds to come and nest. And that's what we need to change. We need to restore the ecological balance. And just saying that sounds kind of like, well, how will we do that? Well, if each of us in our tiny homes or whatever we're stewarding, if we would all do that, then it wouldn't take very long. But we need everybody to do it, including these big industrial farms. And I can tell you, there's no profit for them in that. So that's not their bottom line. So they're not doing that. And if you want to lobby for the laws to be changed for these farms to comply, well, you'll run into different set of problems when you look at your political system, and it's a mess. So we're just left to doing it ourselves and just kind of encouraging more people to become stewards. And that's the empowerment role that I think is important.
Yes, like leading by example in that way, and then open sourcing resources to allow people to get there on their own. So love that. So I asked you 2 parts. So let's maybe do I shouldn't have teed you up so hard on that one, but I'm curious for those small scale farmers, like around marketing nutritional value or nutritional density, how does that tie into the soil health piece, and how do you navigate that in your work?
Okay, so that ties in to the basic fact that the more your soil is alive and healthy, the more you should get that healthiness drawn back into the vegetables that you're growing. So I'm not the best one to explain all that process because it's very chemical and biological, and there's terms for these things, but all of the flavor, all of the vitamins, the nutrients that are in the vegetables come from the soil. So the soil becomes a space where this needs to be there, it needs to be available, and it's a symbiotic relationship. And so as a grower, if that's your bottom line, what you're looking for is not how to do things really fast, is not how to, grow the crops as fast as possible, and is you're trying to say, how can I steward the soil to the best of my ecological knowledge so that the soil will be prime, so that the crops will be prime for our health. That's the bottom line. This being said, nutrient density can be measured. It's something that is relatively new. And I don't see a problem with this, but the situation is that if we grow crops that are just healthier than other, then we're pricing them differently, which is kind of what organic was, not anymore, but was. And then you might be creating a situation where it's just a class of people that are eating these healthier foods. So for me, it needs to be done well, but it needs to be done well not just on the basis of having a premium price for the produce. And that part is harder to balance out. If you understand what I'm trying to say.
I do. Yeah. It's like the idea of how do we not create a market that's only going into Whole Foods and, marginalizing food deserts, food apartheid areas. I think that is, I would actually love a question came in from Barry Zinger. And I think it kind of speaks, it's like a perfect little 1-2 to what we were just talking about. And she's curious, what are your thoughts on a commercial farm with a social mission? And how might human scale farmers become economically viable while promoting social equity by feeding low-income community members? And do you have any examples or models of success that you can share?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's definitely a challenge because, just to be an ecological small scale farmer that can make, a good enough income to take vacations and to have your kids go to university and have healthcare and, all of the, have a normal, decent life is already kind of not easy because the margins are slim, but it's definitely doable. And, we've been doing it, and we've been, a lot of growers are doing it. So it's definitely doable. That's not the problem. The problem is when you try to do that and not go for, selling your veggies at roof prices, because, the difference between me going on vacation is me selling my tomatoes $3.50 or $4 a pound. Because for the same amount of work, I'm just getting more money for my tomatoes. And so in the end, that's what makes me happy, because I can take a vacation because of that 50 cents. But if you're selling all your produce at $2 a pound for your tomatoes, because you want to make sure that it's really affordable, then that creates somewhat of a problem. And I don't have all the answers to these problems. One way to look at this is that, and I don't want to get, tomatoes thrown at me at this, but perhaps it's not the farmer's role to make the food, available at a low cost. Perhaps it should be a social system that does that, or a safety net, or some other mechanisms like income tax, where people that make more money pay more income tax. And that's how that money goes back to, lower income people. And that's how things get balanced out. But when you're asking the farmer to do both, it's not easy. But that's just kind of a perspective on this. I know farms that are doing this and are doing it really well. One farm that I could recommend checking out is Zinger Farm in Oregon. They have a social mission that's built into their DNA, and they're one of the first farm to start a SNAP program. They're really doing amazing work, and that's another piece of the puzzle. Is like, if you want to know how to do this, just find out people that are doing it. and mimic what they're doing, because, you know, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And so, yeah, these are my two answers. I don't know what do you think about these answers?
No tomatoes being thrown over here. I think to me, it's so useful. I mean, it's a reality. Farming is hard, arduous work, and you're out here trying to make ends meet and make a living for yourself too. And there's reciprocity that I think really deserves to be talked about there, and transparency around, you know, it is low margins, and it's something that I think what I've been hearing a lot about is the supply chain, like how the middle is eating up and disproportionately sharing risk between consumers and farmers. So how do we do kind of your model, which I think is beautiful, is just shortening the amount of connections that are in between a consumer and a farmer. I think that's a really beautiful place to at least start to look at. And I mean, all good options. I think there's so many ways that, you know, either subsidizing or exploring alternative methods around making sure people are fed and, you know, are getting nutrient dense food in areas. You know, maybe it is exactly a piece of your model of let's start a small scale farm in a food apartheid and see what happens.
If someone wants to pay me to grow food for whoever, and I'm not depending on, you know, my own productivity to have my income, i.e. I'm not, you know, making a margin on everything that I sell, then I can grow food for whoever, you know. So there's that could be an option, like something that we do on my farm. That's in line with the principle that I was trying to explain, which is it's not me that's paying for the difference. Is that I have a CSA program where I have 3 prices for the same CSA box. I have the regular price, I have the lower price, and I have the higher price. And I leave it up to the people to decide which price they want to pay for their yearly subscription. And the people that pay more, they understand that they're helping out people that are paying less. And that's great. And, you know, that works out. It's affordable for people that have less money. Nobody knows who's paying what except me. And I don't really judge because, you know, that's the role that I play. But in the end, I make the money that I need to make. And the lower income people have access to the food, and the people with more income feel good about it. So, you know, if something could be done on a kind of a national or, you know, on a bigger scale, that I think that's part of the solution.
Yeah, that component of building a sliding scale into each individual operation, I love that, because it also brings it down to the community level. Like if you're providing your CSA to only the local area, and there's balance and reciprocity between who's partially subsidizing other people's amazing food in that area. That's so good. Amazing. Okay, so we're here and we have so many people and they are shouting out questions, and there's so much praise. Like I'm getting a lot of +1s and amens and applause, all caps. So they are loving the information you've shared so far, but I think we have tons of questions. So let's do it. We can kind of rapid fire through them, but we have plenty of time. So take your time. I'm going to start with a question from Greg. And it's around how can small scale farmers in an area band together to share resources, such as tools or distribution or administrative processes or land?
You know, another great question. That's, you know, that's not utopia. That's not what I'm about to say. There's a perception that this is how things should be done. And in many ways, mutualizing things is great. And that's the future. The only thing is, what's hard to mutualize is people's characters and our own faulty behaviors and our own insecurities and our own lack of being able to communicate our feelings and emotions and not being overwhelmed by ours. There's so many, the human experience is so hard to, when we're trying to do things with others and there's not a leader that's there to orient things in a very clear way, it can get really messy. And so that's the challenge. And so anything that will be done by sharing things, it needs to be really well designed so that all these things are kind of dealt with at the design stage. And so when you're when you're going to the co-op to get something, you know, let's say it's a co-op that owns all these tools, or a co-op that sells the produce and also buys tools that can be shared. You know, you're not bumping into Joe that's giving you hell because he wants the tool at the same time. And then it just creates friction. And it's like, oh man, Jill is always doing this, and people are gossiping, because that will happen. And so it needs to be really clever the way that's done. And again, for me, the best way to go about it is just to search and look out for people that are doing it well, and distill what they're doing, and take it from their own experience and recreate something that will be well designed, so that you get the benefits of doing things together, but you don't get the drama, which is why most farmers are like, fuck that. I'm going to be doing it on my own. I'm going to buy my own tools. I don't want to be dealing with these crazy people. And a lot of farmers, young farmers that started like that, are like, nope, you know. And so, because perhaps the design wasn't as good as it could be, you know, so that's my long-winded answer.
I appreciate that. It's like a playbook is needed to co-op and share these resources and create like a systemic way to go about it.
Yeah. And I think business and business organization and can teach us a few things about how to do these things, because, you know, businesses, when you have 20, 50, 100, 1,000 people working, is how to organize people together in one way. So this is something to kind of be in tune with. And yeah, if you're just going on good faith, there's a good chance that it's not going to work out.
Definitely. I mean, I've heard a perspective recently around asking farmers to be like an entrepreneur. Like, there's really no other industries. Like, if you're, you know, a web specialist, technology expert, or if you're a community organizer, you really have your niche, and farmers are holding so many pieces of that. They're an entrepreneur fully, they're a marketing team, they're growing the food on the land, they're supposed to work with distribution and like selling it and be in person and everything. So it's a lot to hold and ask of folks. So I really do agree. Like, there's room for collaboration, and then also strategies around that could be really
useful.
Yeah,
and everything that you've described, you know, if you're trying to grow a farm beyond just like a micro farm, well, you know, you organize it into teams, you organize it into managers. Okay, you're in charge of the bees. You're in, like at this farm here where I'm at, it's like somebody's in charge of the animal husbandry. Like, I'm not the one going and feeding the cow, and I don't know what the cows are doing today, but I know they're there and I see them, and I'm happy that they're pooping, because, you know, I'm using their poop in my veggie garden. And there's somebody that's doing some admin work and doing the payroll for all of us. And there's somebody that's in charge of dealing with the chefs in the restaurants. And we all come together, and then we share and we delegate, and then we organize the week, and then we organize the month and the year. It's run like a typical business, but it's a farm. So that's, you know, there's different models out there, but I know I wouldn't count out I don't want to say corporate, but you know what I mean? Like the model of just running a business, and having a farm run that way.
So appreciate that. So speaking in those terms, because it is such a business, I'm curious, within the recent events of the world, I just got a direct message. How did COVID show up in the business? I know that you guys produce and then sell directly to consumers, but also have a large outlet with restaurants. I'm curious how that showed up in the past year. And then also, did it affect your vision for the future, how you want to navigate being a market gardener going forward?
Another great question. Now, it hasn't affected my optimism about why what we do is important. I think on the reverse, like it showed me that what we do is really important, especially, Quebec, Canada, and it's like that anywhere in the US. Like 90% of the veggies come from California. It's like California is feeding a lot of people in North America. And just if the borders are shut down, or if the migrant workers need to be better paid, or if they're all sick because of COVID, or there's no more water in the aquifers, or if you can't plow anymore because there's carbon taxes or whatever, you know, there's a real possibility that there's going to be shortage of fresh vegetables, and so that can bring a lot of awareness to the importance of the local food shed. And I think that COVID has really helped in that way. A lot of people now realize the importance of having a local source of fresh vegetables and fresh fruits. And that, where I am, has been really huge. Like the prime minister, here we have a prime minister, you know, was public about, you know, calling out everyone to support local farms, and just kind of this year, it's really important that we go out and we buy from food grown here by, you know, Quebec farmers. And that was huge. A lot of the CSA farmers in my network, they were sold out. It's like, boom, after that call out. So there was something positive about that. The definite negative was all our friends in the restaurant industry, chefs that are friends of mine, all the people working in those restaurants, they got shut down for a full year. They're still shut down in Montreal. And that's just, you know, it's hard for me to be positive about that. It's when you tell people that they can't work anymore in the industry that they love and they're passionate about, it's a killer. You know, it's a killer for all of the good food. You know, you were talking about I liking good wine and good natural wines, good food. Quebec is it's like the little Europe here. You know, we have the finest food anywhere. We have the best chefs, and it's just like, if you come down to Montreal, I'm inviting you. You know, we'll go out and we'll eat amazing food, and it's all not there anymore. And I'm not sure if it's going to perk right back, because there was a full year of taking a hit on an industry that's already not making that much money. Mm-hmm. And so that's my definite negative COVID story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important to point to those realities too. I appreciate your perspective. And of course, being a grower and producer, it makes sense that you have close relationships with restaurateurs and people who are, you know, the chefs in the world. So it's like the extension of consumer to you, like you have that relational nature and see the human side of what they've gone through. So I appreciate you coloring that in. I think that's powerful and definitely hopeful that things will return back to some state of normal. And we have another question. Guys, be tossing your questions in the chats. Super excited to see a few more coming in. And we've got Jam here with us for about another 20 minutes or so. So definitely this is your time. I think we have a lot of technical questions, it looks like. So I'd love to maybe rapid fire a few of those. And the first one is from Mario, and it's, how do perennial tree crops fit into your model? And has your view of perennials evolved over time?
That's, you know, people are asking great questions.
Right? I love perennials.
Yeah,
let's talk about it. I need to know more.
Perennials are amazing because they're supposed to be lower maintenance. That was what I thought when I planted a lot of them here at this farm. And in the end, we designed a lot of the farm here according to great permaculture principles. And, you know, if people want to Google Ferme Quatre-Temps, FQT farm, it's an amazing place. It really is. It's bursting with life. And what we've done here is really, and when people look at this farm, they're like, wow, this is hyper productive. This is human scale. There's no tractor for the veggies. There's, you know, ecological niches everywhere. It's just, but what failed was our perennial strategy. And it really failed because it was all designed for us to put a lot of time, money up front to design beds that were supposed to be weed-free, maintenance-free for many, many years. And that didn't work. And so we're so busy catering to the annual veggies that when we need to take care of the perennial also, especially if they have, deep beddings or whatever, that we can't just go with our hose to rip out the weeds, and we need to hand pull everything. We need to clean on our knees. That's not how we operate in the market garden. You know, we have tools and we're designed to be efficient in our work, but for the perennials, it was supposed to be a maintenance-free project and it wasn't. So was it poorly designed? You know, I don't think so, because there is a lot of great people behind that project. But I think that perennials are work, just like anything else. And so it becomes, okay, I'm doing perennials, I'm doing annuals. Am I doing fruit trees? Am I doing bees? Am I also, do I have a few pigs? Do I have cattle? Am I doing, in the end, do you have time to also play music? Do you have time to also, go for bike rides with your kids? Do you have time to hang out at the bar sometimes, which I like to do? So it's all a matter of what is your core time going to be spent with. And so we mix a few of them. But I guess my message to make a long story short is, it's not miraculous that it's just like something that you put out and then you'll just go harvest. At least it wasn't the case for my experience in farming.
No, I appreciate that. And perennials, I mean, my understanding of them is you plant them and it should just come up year after year, right? So it's amazing that there's this perception that it's easy, you plant it and it's like walk away, maybe water it every so often, and there's so much more work behind it. So interesting. I like that perspective though, of like the balanced approach. Like maybe it's not this year, maybe that's a project further down the road. Birthday, I think I'm saying that, is really curious about the connection in your experience between permaculture and market gardening, like no-till practices. How do those two interplay and interweave?
You have your market garden, and then you have your permaculture. So they're intertwined, but they're not the same. Market gardening is market gardening, and you're designing it to be efficient. It's all about shaving minutes, saving time in everything that we do. So it's designed for productivity. It's designed for energy input. It's a lot of energy, and it's a lot of energy output. And you surround it by permaculture principles where you have, flowering hedgerows, you have natural habitats for toads, for snake, for birds, for frogs. You could have some perennials that are there. That's where you surround your market garden with some permaculture principled applied things. And permaculture is not a thing, it's a science. It's a way of designing things, guilds and all of this. And that's where I see that the sweet spot is that you are creating a habitat with those principles, but you're sticking with real market gardening strategies that are tested, trialed, true, proven, and that make you efficient. You're not trying to do both on the same space. You know what I mean? Like, you're not growing your veggie in a permaculture way, and you're kind of separating it, but making it work together.
I love that, like a hybrid model. Like take the scale of market gardening and then overlay it and texturize and make every decision through the lens of a permaculturist. I think that's very powerful. So appreciate that.
Yeah, because the permaculturist makes his money by working on designs and selling designs. And we make money by extracting or taking one carrot at a time, one radish at a time, one leaf of a spinach at a time. What we do as we grow food is repetitive motions of doing the same thing. And the margins on all of these things are very slim. And so that's something to always kind of really understand.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's so fun. Okay, more technical questions because I'm loving where this is going and I feel like people have such an appetite for it. This may be a little too technical, and I'd love also if you could share where people could reach out maybe to your team if there's a good resource for that. But Justin is really curious just around the finances of starting your own operation. Like how much is too much to spend on hoop houses or BCs? I'm not sure what BC or
BCS.
BCS. What is BCS?
It's a motorized two-wheel tractor.
Okay,
and
cool.
and it's something that you're farming with your feet on the ground. You're using it. It's how we prepare the seed beds, and yeah, it's a small engine. Yeah.
Okay, love it, love it. So, how much is too much to spend on hoop houses or BCS and attachments for a first year farming on an acre of land?
Well, that's a tough question because it really depends on what's there, what's not there, what's your, your projection for sales this year. For me, when I look at a question like that, I would kind of distill it, and I'm like, okay, how many people are you planning on having on that piece of land? How many permabeds do you have? Are they standardized? They should be. Are they grouped together in field blocks? Yes, they should be. Okay, great. You have, irrigation system. You have tarps. You need to have somewhat of the basics. You're going to be able to supply your CSA or your farmers market. And the best way, it's not the way that's the most usual because, is to know exactly what you need to do. And that's why I teach an online course, because I go to the steps of all these things and I teach you exactly how this should be done, how this should be done, how this should be done. But once you know how to do things, you're like, okay, I'll be doing this. It implies that. And my goal is to sell that much of veggies. And you reverse engineer from that goal to your production plan and to what you need to get the production plan going. And I'm probably not helping. I don't remember his name who asked the question because it's kind of a high level answer, but that's really, yeah. And borrowing money. If you know what you're doing, then it's a great idea for me, in my opinion, to borrow money so that you can get the equipment, the material that you need to be productive, make money on your production, and then you pay this back incrementally over many, many years instead of just kind of paying it up front and having no more cash. And so there's I'd rather people go bankrupt after 3 years trying gun ho than just kind of 3 years of struggling and kind of like never making it because they don't have the material, they don't have the greenhouses, they don't have the irrigation system. They're always struggling because they don't have the proper material, and then they can't produce properly, so they're not making money, so they can't. So it's like a never-ending cycle of, yeah. Make sense?
Yes, definitely. I think the financing piece is super poignant and misunderstood also of, approach it as a business and like move forward with that intentionality around it. That's a good question. I mean, I'm curious about this too. I don't know if this is your expertise, so feel free to say no, like, I don't know, like pass, next one. But Janine's really curious around that question on borrowing money. If you know of or have any kind of thoughts around average folks investing within regenerative farming.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of funds out there. It's happening, and it's going to happen. I think a big part of the revolution that we're about to live is that a lot of people that are investing in funds that are kind of destroying the planet because they're putting their funds in whatever, the oil industry or whatever. A lot of people will be looking to put money into something that they think is creating a positive outcome. That's becoming more and more of a trend, and small scale farming is doing that. And local farms are creating local community vibrancy, just like the craft beer movements. Like when a small craft brewery opens in your neighborhood, it creates a lot of a good thing. And that's what small farms are also doing. So for me, it's I can really see in the next few years, and I know that it's already being done on many places, funds to help especially young people getting into farming that are managed by people that are expecting some returns, but not short-term, long-term returns. And that could work because if you lend me, 50 grand for 5 or 10 years, there's a good chance that in 10 years, I'll be good. I'll be making money and I'll be able to pay it off and pay you some royalties on that 50 grand. And plus I'll be creating something cool and vibrant in that community. So if you're in that community, that's positive for you. You perhaps are eating food from me. And so micro loans, I think, are something that's happening.
Definitely. I love that. There's a few resources too. I know Cone Van Sijen, his Investing in Regenerative Agriculture podcast is super powerful, highlighting a bunch of folks. Andrea just chimed in that Rodale has grants available. And if you guys hop into the Farmers Footprint community, we have a whole finance topic, so we could dive deeper onto this, but really appreciate that question, Janine. Thanks for bringing it up. Love this question from Beth. And to front load it a little bit, she's asking around like some of the best and accessible beginners resources for discovering local permaculture practices. And specifically, I think she's curious to know, what are the best local or indigenous to your area perhaps, or maybe a decentralized look at that? And like, where have you found this local wisdom? So that's the main question, but I feel like I've seen you do part of this, because I know you guys let plots rest for half a year every 4 years. And that's actually a pretty ancient, like that rotation with the burn and slash initiatives that Indigenous people used. There's so much ability for the land to rest and regenerate itself. So that natural healing that comes about, I see that in part of your methodology. But yeah, curious, like best local or Indigenous practices, have you drawn upon any of that?
Well, that's another great question. For the permaculture strategies, you know, there's a lot of good books out there. I'm not really familiar with you know, organizations that are doing stuff on the field that I would recommend, but they're out there. But Bill Mollison is always a great read, and he's kind of the founder behind permaculture, and I've always enjoyed his book. They're thick, but you know, you learn a lot from them. So that's the first thing. So for traditional ecological knowledge, where I am in Quebec, Canada, a lot of that knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, was from the natives that were here, but they weren't farmers. They were hunters, and they would move. So the first settlements were really more the French when they came here, and they brought a lot of the strategies and techniques from France. And so for me, to answer that question, when somebody asks me, where do I get like the traditional knowledge of farming, is when I read the old French books written in the 1700s and the 1600s and the 1800s. And then that knowledge is based probably on, I don't know what down there, or what was being done in Asia also, you know, and China. You know, Farmer of 40 Centuries is a great book. It's one of the first book on organic farming. And what we come to realize is that the ecological principles are the same, but how you work different crops in these principles, each culture does it differently. So yeah, that's my answer.
I love that. We're getting tons of thanks so much. I was thinking about getting to know where grows best. That's beautiful. And Leia, thanks for dropping some of those links in there for those books. Gorgeous. We're having a discussion tomorrow on rural meets urban. And we have a question that came in around how do we bring this style of homesteading and farming to urban plots? So I'm curious kind of how far you are from what you'd consider to be an urban center, or if you are close to an urban center. And how do you interact? How do you like bridge build between the rural and urban spaces?
You just plant stuff. Like, what's this guy's name? I should know him. He's in California. He just has this beautiful setup. Well, it'll come back to me. But, you know, concrete needs to be ripped out, or planters needs to be put everywhere. We really need, cities really need to be re-vegetalized. And this is happening in many ways. And my take on that question, and it's not fair if people are living in the city to kind of say that, but I really think people should be moving out of cities. That's what I think. Like, because cities were meant for people that were working in industries, and the factories were made in cities. But again, 100 years ago, people were living in the countryside, and it was a very different kind of communal environment, and how interactions were made, and you had access to common land or common rivers or fields or whatever. You have access, you know, the country, you have access to places that you can do stuff. Cities, it's sometimes hard, and to reclaim a street, to reclaim a backyard is possible. And, you know, that's definitely where you start. But I'm kind of big now on, we should kind of be moving out of cities. I don't know if I can say that without sounding terrible.
You can say anything. I love that. I mean, I think it's an important piece. Like, how do we bring the two closer together? So the revitalization and revegetation within urban spaces, and then how do you?
Disclaimer: I'm kind of disconnected from cities because I'm enjoying country life a lot. So for me, when I go to cities, I like the restaurants and coffee place, and that's about it. And then, so I'm not the best one to kind of ask us. And urban farms are amazing and we need them. They're a great way to just have people reconnect with nature in cities. And we should have urban farms everywhere. And each plot that can be vegetalized should be. But for me, I'm like, wow, it's just like the beauty is everywhere in nature. And the nature is not in the city. It's when you leave it. So that's my theory about that.
No, I appreciate it. And it's useful. I mean, where you're spending a lot of your time, I think that perspective and lens is important for folks to pick up on when they are living in cities, to know that something different exists and, a viable way to move into that. So thank you. Beautiful answer. I love this. We're getting so many thank yous. I've learned so much and suggested resources. This is so, so good.
I'm seeing a lot of people leaving. I'm like, oh, am I telling the wrong answers?
No, we're right at the cusp. We have about 3 minutes, so that's probably why they're probably jumping to other calls. But I want to actually just take a minute and ask you a final kind of wrap up question. And it's around, if you could share one short message for the world to see, what would it say? And or do you want to just leave us with any final thoughts?
I think small scale farming is changing the world. We're showing that, life can be lived very differently on farms and cooperatively and then with nature. And we're showing also that, it's possible to be productive and yet be, ecologically sound, and you can make a living, and then you can create a community. And I'm just such a big fan of not just farmers, but this whole smaller system and how we're just kind of doing things and reclaiming things and just kind of doing it. And I'm really inspired by the microbrewery. They're popping up everywhere. They're creating jobs. They're just crafting beers that are different with different looks and different tastes, bringing people together. And I think farms are doing that also. And we just need to keep this moving, going and going and going and going. And then I think that's so positive. And then we have the good food revolution, people appreciating not just fine food, but just food that's kind of grown with care by people who care. So that's I circle back to that a lot.
Yeah. it's an inspiring piece. It's something that I feel like you've lived and led with your heart in this work. And to kind of reflect back on your comment around microbreweries, I've heard a quote that no two farms are alike because no two people are alike. Like when people are working in close relationship and growing for others and for themselves, it really becomes an expression of who they are. So I just love that image of resiliency and biodiversity that's possible when people are expressing themselves by growing food and sharing it with others.
Yeah, it's powerful. And then you don't need to be a full-fledged farmer. You can have your little plot, you can have your balcony filled with pots or with whatever. It's very empowering to grow stuff. And when we grow stuff, we grow ourselves. And that's why having our hands in the soil, and that's why just kind of doing it is so important, because it is nourishing not just our stomachs, but our soul or spirit.
It's so true. Small scale farming, re-nourishing ourselves. Okay, Jan, this was incredible. Thank you so much for showing up in your greenhouse and sharing your time with us. I'm getting so many praised hands, wonderful interview, holding garden hands across the world from Karen.
Oh, beautiful.
Yes, Karen, wherever you are. Merci, thank you. Playing in the dirt kept me sane this past year. Jan, your wisdom just shone through. Thank you so much for taking the time and having some one-on-one touch with this amazing community, and for bringing yours and being a bridge builder and connector in that way. You're doing such incredible work. Leah shared out some amazing resources throughout. And if you guys head to the event page in Mighty Networks, we'll share all of the best ways to get in touch with Jam and follow along with his work. And if you guys are new to Farmer's Footprint and want to keep the conversation going, we host these Farmside chat series on an ongoing basis and are featuring stories of farmers like JM also doing incredible work, small scale, large scale, of all different shapes and sizes. So that biodiversity and resiliency of us all being here and being a part of this conversation and creating this human mosaic of what agriculture can look like is absolutely imperative to us taking steps forward together. So I'm so inspired. Thank you so much, Jam, for sharing your time with us. We know you could be anywhere in the world today for this hour and 15 minutes, and it's a great honor that you chose to be here with us. So really appreciate it.
It was fun. We should do it again. And it was great. I love these discussions, and I hope everyone's well, and be safe out there and play outside. It's important.
Cheers. All right, guys, have a great rest of your day.